talk about Salesforce Spring 24. So the first thing I want to talk about is the multi-factor authenticator that is being enforced and is being turned on in April. So if you haven't set that up yet, go ahead and do that. One thing I also want to point out is that the enforcement for the Salesforce orgs is shifting to in-app notifications starting in summer 24. So and the next release, they're going to be the notifications for enforcement of this is going to be an in-app notification versus all the emails and everything else that you've been receiving is going to be all based in Salesforce. It shouldn't be surprising anyone. They've been warning us for almost 3 years now that they're going to do this. So this is nothing new. This is the deadline is upon us. All right. So if you're not using dynamic forms, you probably should because it's kind of really cool now. They've done a lot of cool updates to it. One of the cool things now is that we can now drill up to 2 layers with the fields. So if I bring a field onto the page, you see that little caret there and next to the field, that means you can access that field. So if this is like a lookup field, which is what this is here, you can access the account information on the contact. So before, if you want to do that, you had to go and build a related record and put that in the page, and you had to put all the things in there. Now you can directly take fields directly from the account and put them on a contact record to any relationships that are available like that. You can do that. The one call here is that does not support polymorphic fields, which just basically means any of those fields where you have multiple lookups to different objects, it doesn't support. So most likely, if you want to do dynamic forms on a task, you can't do this type of relationship because it doesn't support it on most of those field types. But this is kind of a cool little feature that came through. It's been something that I was asked for when I first got hold of dynamic forms. I was like, hey, I really wish I could just go get fields from over here. And then about a year later, after I asked for it and all that, not just me, but the whole community asked for those updates, and then here you go, and now we got it. One of the other cool things with dynamic forms is the field visibility. So depending on the forms, that we can now add additional filters based on device type. So we can now look to see if it's like a mobile device, if it's a or a phone or a desktop. So you can basically hide different things based on visibility of the device that's being sent to you. I just think it makes things a lot easier and cleaner if you haven't set up a lot of the mobile things. If you're going to use this functionality on your phone, you can now dynamically show things depending on your device type. All right. Staying on the dynamic forms here, one other cool thing is if you've ever used Salesforce, you know that the little red star equals required. They've now made this little on the dynamic forms. They made this page there show up. It wasn't there before. It was on all your other page layouts. It wasn't on dynamic forms. They now put this on dynamic forms. Just helps your end users make things a little bit cleaner, so they understand what that red star is. Most people know what it means, but now there's a little chart telling you exactly what that means, so there's no confusion around that. Life hacks. All right. So that was that. I don't know if any of you use AMP migration, but they're ending the life of the AMP migration tool, which ends in Spring 24 here. They want you to switch over to Salesforce CLI for more up-to-date developer experience. The tool will still work with the API versions, but it's not going to be updated with any new functionality. So as Salesforce keeps moving on, they're not going to keep updating the AMP migration tool. So you can still use the tool, but it's going to get capped on the version. So you can use it with future versions, but some of the new functionality is going to be coming through with a lot of the stuff may or may not work with the AMP migration. So recommendation, if you're going to be using the AMP migration, or if you use AMP migration tools, or if you want to use tools like that, move over to the Salesforce CLI. It's actually a better interface. It's a little bit cleaner to work with, and does the same thing, just a little bit a bit easier tool to do. And that tool actually is a lot more robust than just AMP migration tool. You can do a lot of other cool things in there as well. All right. This was something that was really cool to me. I don't know if you've ever tried to update organization-wide defaults, but if you have, sometimes depending on the size of your org, it can take a minute. Sometimes it can take half an hour. So they've done some process updates to this to make when you update your org-wide defaults, the jobs are going to process faster. So they're going to just make that process easier for you. Another cool thing is you can actually monitor the process by looking at the background jobs. So you can go and look at your background jobs for when you make the updates. You can see where they're sitting at. So beforehand, you just kind of had to wait and wait and wait, and you couldn't do anything else. And you can't do anything else until they happen. But now you can look at the jobs that are running in the background to see when that job's supposed to be complete. Then you can kind of time things a little bit better. But everything overall, it's going to make life a little bit faster, a little bit easier for us to work through those types of things. There's some permission updates. Permission set groups are now in all editions. So if you're on any version of Salesforce, you have access to permission set groups. Permission set groups are a great tool to make your life easier when assigning permissions. You can build a group and then assign multiple permission sets to that group. So you can just assign the group, and everyone who has that permission set group gets those permission sets in that group. So that's kind of a nice thing that everyone gets to have that benefit now, not just the higher editions. One of the other cool things is that if you're going to be deleting a permission set that's assigned to a user, you're not going to receive a notification for it. Beforehand, it would just remove it, and then you would be like, well, what happened? Why down? The user would be like, I don't know, I don't have access anymore. So now you get notified before you try to delete the permissions that's saying, hey, so and so has been assigned to this permission set. Maybe you should go remove it first. All right. This is something that I think is going to be very helpful for newer individuals who are creating fields. Before you create a multi-select pick list, I didn't tell you in the limitations around multi-select pick list. Now it gives you just a nice little warning message that basically says, hey, before you create this multi-select list, just make sure you know about that there are going to be some limitations when you try to run automation, reports, formulas, data imports, and integrations. And if you want to review all of the considerations, you can click that little link in there and you can see all. Mainly, multi-select lists are a good use case for some scenarios, but sometimes they add additional complexity to things that you don't want to be complex. They're great in theory, but sometimes, like when you try to run reports, you try to run automations, you have to have things set up in a set way. And if they're not set up in a set way, it makes things a living nightmare for you. So, at least letting you know ahead of time before you do that there's potential. It could impact what you're trying to do later on. So think about how you want to use this field and where you want to utilize it first before you go ahead and just create a multi-select pick list field. All right. There's a lot of cool new updates to Flow Builder. If you're using Data Cloud, you can now send data to Data Cloud with Flow. Beforehand, you could reference the data, but now you can actually send data to Data Cloud with your Flow. You can verify your API connections via the HTTP callouts now within the Flow Builder before you had to do it outside of there. Now you can actually verify your connection, make sure it's a valid connection before you move on. So when you're actually in the builder, you can verify your connection, which is kind of nice. So it's not just build the whole entire flow and then wait to the end there and hope that your connection was correct. You can check it right there as soon as you're building it. One of the cool features in Flow Builder is that your display text and log text components are now reactive to other parts in the same screen. So just adding additional dynamic reactive components within your screens there. So they added the text and log text fields as options in there. One other cool thing is when you're building flows, you can save at any point without finishing the configuration for all the elements, minus screens and actions. So as you're building, I don't know if you've ever been at the point where you're trying to do an update and you're like, oh, I know I need these 5 fields, but I'm not sure what they need to do. You can start saving things and then just keep going from there. If you are still utilizing workflow rules and process builders, there is an updated migration flow tool for that can basically partially migrate all actions except for invocable methods. So if you're using those things beforehand, they updated the tool to basically support any migration. So if you haven't migrated all your workflow rules and process builders yet, they've enhanced the tool to make that process a little bit easier. As a reminder, you can't create new workflow rules and you can't create new process builders. Everything has to be created with Flow, but you could still have modified some of those old items, but now they want you to migrate everything. They want everything to be in Flow. It's a more robust tool, makes more sense than trying to manage 3 different automation tools within Salesforce. All right, and then we have our pipeline inspection. So if you're a salesperson or you're managing sales teams, all your metrics, list views now have a 2,000 record limit. It was only 1,000 before. So we get some new enhancements so we can actually see more data. We can make better decisions because we have more data elements we can data points you can look at. So agents can now just see more deals and view a wider time frame as well. So with that update there, we can expand our timeline. So it's not just the current couple quarters. We can expand it and look at the complete pipeline for a longer time frame. Another cool thing that came through recently is that within the email alerts, if you're using email alerts, they're currently there. You could use them before. You can use them in Flow. You can use them in approval processes. You can use them in workflow rules. But beforehand, if you're using a email alert and a flow, you didn't know which flows utilize it. So when you came to the email alert page here, you didn't know if it was being utilized in a flow or not. You now have the ability to see which flows are using the email alert. So if it's being utilized in one or more flows, you can go on here and take a look at that in case you're trying to clean up some things and you're like, we can get rid of this. And you're like, oh, never mind, I can't get rid of it because it's tied to a flow. You maybe need to go into the flow first, adjust to a different email alert, and then you can remove it or whatever the case may be. But you can get a little more insights into where your email alerts are being utilized in your org. This is actually a kind of a pretty big deal. The unlimited pause and waiting for flow and waiting flows. Before you were capped on the number of paused and waiting flows you were having, that was a per use based limit waiting for flow interviews. So depending on beforehand, depending on how many records you had paused and waiting, if you had like time dependent flows and things of that nature that were paused, you could get capped, and the cap was roughly around 500,000. And for some users of companies like that, it's not a big deal, but it was a big deal because if you had 500,000 records, or if you had multiple flows that could get paused, you could easily hit your limits. And then if you had a pause, if you had a flow that would get paused and you're at your cap, your flow wouldn't finish, it would just get terminated. So that your actual flow would never fire after it was paused. So now Salesforce has removed that limitation for you. So now you can go at it. But just remember that your Salesforce storage can still limit you on how many pause and waiting flows you have. So they removed the limit, but you're still capped by the amount of storage you have available in your org. So just kind of nice little feature there, so that some of those larger companies or even smaller companies are doing a lot of time-dependent actions. They're not going to be limited by the cap that was imposed by Salesforce beforehand. All right. If you're utilizing cases, this is probably going to be this is a good release for you. Just remember you want to disable that reference ID to move to the new email threading behavior that's being offered in Salesforce. That old threading behavior is being disabled. So if you're utilizing it and you're still relying on it for the threading to happen, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work after spring here. You need to migrate to the new threading behavior. If you haven't done so, do so immediately, otherwise it's not going to work. And this shouldn't be new to most people because Salesforce has been warning about this since they introduced the new email threading, that they're going to disable the old reference ID. So we had plenty of time to adjust for it. The email to case body. So if you utilize email to case, the body is now 131,000 characters. Before it was only 32,000. So we have a big increase in there. That's to help support the email threading behavior, but also we know there's a lot of back and forth, and sometimes you need to have the complete history. So the body now shows more characters in there versus just that cap of the 32,000 beforehand. And then there is a new field called email routing address that's being added to the email message object. So if you are using email the case and the email message, the email routing address that it comes from is going to be now stored in there. So that's a nice little feature that you can see how it's being routed. So a nice little new feature that Salesforce threw in there that I think quite a few people kind of just glossed over. All right, those are my updates and my highlights from the spring 24 release here.